Okay, so here we are. We're really doing this.
Yeah, this is either a great idea or about to get really uncomfortable.
Well, that's kind of the point, right? I mean, have you ever just looked around and thought, how did I get here?
How did I get here? Totally. For me, it wasn't really a thought. It was more like this massive sound that started ripping through my ear. And I suddenly realized that my life as a musician was just not going to be happening anymore. What about you?
Yeah, well, mine was a relationship ending and the realization that my future wasn't certain, and
Right.
just trying to figure out what just happened in the past 10 years. And then there's like complete silence, and no one can really tell you how loud that silence can be.
Yeah. Well, so if you're actually listening to this podcast and you're in that in between space where something just doesn't feel right or cracked open or your life has to basically take a massive turn in a new direction, you might be in the right place.
Yeah, this is for you. And you're not the only one out there asking, what now?
Yeah, and that's what we're here to talk about. What happens when life asks you to basically begin again?
You're listening to The Edge of Reckoning. I'm Sue.
And I'm Neil.
And this is a podcast about navigating life's turning points with awareness, honesty, and heart.
We're two Gen X friends exploring what it means to meet change with open eyes and an open mind.
Thanks for being here. Let's begin.
So, Sue, we named this podcast The Edge of Reckoning. What's a reckoning?
I look at the reckoning as the moment in time where you need to make a decision, where you need to evaluate what's going on and make a choice as to what you're going to do next. That's that's
Okay.
how I looked at it. How about you?
I wonder about the choice piece because the reckonings that I've experienced, I haven't had a choice but to deal with it. My choice
Mm.
comes on how I choose to respond to it.
Okay, so the reckoning for you isn't
Isn't
is
necessarily a moment that I have to make a choice because I think the
it
choice has been made in some regards because
I
it could
see.
be I was fired from a job or my girlfriend left me or whatever it might be. Like I don't have any choice over the reason, I guess, of why the reckoning is happening, but the reckoning is that moment where you are forced to pivot, where you can no longer go back. You can't keep things happening in the same manner that you have in the past. What you might even been called or identified as being is no longer true. Like
Hmm.
I am no longer a trumpet player. Um, you're no longer part of a duo of people working through life as a partner. But that might not be the true issue that you're dealing with, but it has forced you that moment in time to look at the world a little different. That's kind of where, like, I call it a life pivot.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah, it's the pivot.
And so, really, I think what we're trying to do with the Edge of Reckoning is to help people learn how to navigate the inevitable upheavals with a
Mm.
type of awareness and honesty and compassion that can help them like eliminate some of the suffering. I think through our conversations and our storytelling, we can explore what it means to face that kind of identity loss, the unexpected change, and the emotional reckonings that happen as a result of it, and maybe ultimately learn how to grow through the process of this reckoning rather than trying to run away from it. I don't think we're going to be looking to give like advice to people or quick fixes by any means. I think we're here to walk to the edge of that reckoning with our listeners, to question, to witness,
Hmm.
and maybe help people learn to stay present through the discomfort that they're going through. And as I think we develop each episode, we should be able to invite deeper reflection on how we can reshape the meaning of our lives and rebuild identity and potentially move forward through kind of a mindfulness, even when we don't know what the heck is coming next,
Yeah.
right? So you
Right.
you just went through a situation where your partner chose to move on, and
Right.
you were mentioning
Yeah.
something about just what you thought was the real issue of your pain and suffering that you've gone through with the reckoning. Can you elaborate on some of that?
As you just mentioned, it became very clear to me that my happiness and my security not even financially, but just the future of all these dreams and experiences that I was looking forward to were now no longer in existence.
Right.
Everything in, and not that I live in the future, but you do live with some sort of sense of understanding certain things are going to happen a certain way. So now there was so much uncertainty in my life
Mm.
and having to deal with the bottom kind of dropping out from under me. There's no safety net. There is nobody there anymore as a partner on every level that you can possibly humanly think, that was just all of a sudden gone, almost like a death.
Did you feel like you were like stuck in a pretty dark emotional state for a long period of time?
Yeah, I would describe that as like a numbness,
Mm-hmm.
not even being able to identify what emotions I was feeling. Just it's just dark, lonely, hurt, hopeless, all of those things just layered and layered and layered. And there was other things going on, of course, in the country, and the fires in LA
It all
impacted
starts
me
to add up.
directly. So there's just I couldn't really make light out of anything. And
Mm-hmm.
I have all these tools. I have self-reflection. I have awareness. I teach happiness. I teach
Mm-hmm.
how to identify limiting beliefs. All these tools that I have, I still couldn't get myself out of it.
Have you had some sort of revelation since then that new tools have come to you that have allowed you to navigate some of this, or is it just understanding that it's not a permanent state?
I think a lot of it has been just changing my perspective. There has been growth and around my own way of being more mindful and changing my look at how I used to vision my future. Do you want to share a little bit about what you went through and
Yeah,
what you think got you through it? I know we're still presently going through it.
yeah, it's still part
It's
of it.
still a process.
It's
Yeah.
still in its raw form to some degree. My story is complicated in some regards, but I was a teacher for 30 some odd years of music and composer, arranger, and then when I chose to leave teaching abruptly because COVID basically limited my program significantly, and it was very challenging to still teach after those effects of COVID had affected my program. That I went through that first reckoning where it was time to stop teaching. And then as I was rebuilding my life, I started turning more to my performance career and recently had an injury to my ear where I lost the ability to hear sound without extreme distortion in my left ear. And that has prevented me from playing. I had to turn down all my gigs and my conducting engagements, and I was working at a college, and I had to resign from that because the working with sound is incredibly challenging because of the distortion that happens. And the moment of reckoning really came when I tried to play basically my last gig and realized that it was virtually impossible to hear my own self play. And I came home and was pretty much in a puddle because I determined through that whole process that my identity was so tied to my musicianship. Musicians are all egotists as it is, and we have to be out there in front of people, and we define ourselves by the success of ourselves as how well we play. And as all this was essentially taken away from me after so many decades of studying and playing and have it as part of my life, to walk away from that just basically destroyed me. But this process and all the studying that I've been doing to understand how I think has made a huge difference for me. And these conversations that you and I have been having about the kind of the arc of how we go through a reckoning has been incredibly enlightening and has allowed me to see things a lot more clearly.
Mm,
But I think probably the toughest thing, and I'm not sure if this was the same for you, but the story that we believe about ourselves,
hmm
it comes to a point where that no longer works or it's suddenly taken away. And when that happens, we have to figure out how to like re-navigate the world because our identity is our internal map. And it includes all the roles. I'm a partner, I'm a parent, I'm a musician, I'm a conductor, I'm all these things. And I tend to think my identity was all based on what I did with my life
Hmm.
and not necessarily the essence of who I was and how I related to people and the connections that I have. So I had this massive attachment to who I was. I still do. And it's going to
Hmm.
take a long time to begin again, I guess. My brain scrambles to try to protect that story that I have in my head when I'm feeling this incredible level of uncertainty about what's going to happen next. The other piece of this, which I know you went through, is just understanding the grief and the whole stages of grief, which was pretty profound. And through mindfulness training, I really worked on learning how just to feel it and just accept the fact that these emotions were in me and understand that they're not going to be there forever and just allow them to be present, let myself be miserable, and then start taking action to try to find ways to see things differently so I could change my perception.
I wanted to just go back a little bit to the identifying in the story and the roles
Mm-hmm.
and I think like right out of the gate we tend to ask ourselves like why and why this happened to us. And I think that directly correlates to your story. Like, why would this happen to me? I'm a musician.
Mm.
And so I think the why puts that in check, so to speak, right? Like this can't happen to me. Like almost that denial piece and the grief.
Yeah.
And then and then what I heard you just say is you switch that to a how. How can I make this better? And to get away from the why, because there's no answers to the why. You could stay in the why forever and ever and ever and never answer
Mm.
why do well for that instance, like why did this happen to me? And you're looking for like a more universal answer, maybe, that's a more
Is that
spiritual.
is that clinging to the past? Is that when if I say why I'm a musician, why did this happen? Is it because I'm trying to hold on to what I was, which I guess is a natural instinct, right?
Sure, yeah. And your story is important. I don't think it's bad to identify with what you do as a job. It's just a part of it. It shouldn't be the
The
whole,
whole.
you shouldn't put all of your identity into one bucket,
Mm.
right? And having that awareness that you have now is amazing. And I think you'll get to a point where we'll, peeling back these layers to get to who we truly are. And you're creative. However that shows up. It used to be music.
Mm-hmm.
It still may be down the line, but there's other ways for you to be creative also. And allowing yourself to open that door up and changing your story from just being a musician to now it's allowing you to be like, oh, I can be creative in other ways, right? So your story changes, but it's still the novel, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
still the book of Neil. It just is a different chapter, and that story is still who you are,
Sure.
but there's all these different chapters. So in that limiting belief umbrella, I guess we could
Mm-hmm.
say, is where your story started back when we were infants and what parents may have said to us
Mm-hmm.
and our cultures, how they tell us things in innocuous ways that aren't really meant to penetrate deep inside of us, but we do hang on to these types of statements. And the example I like to use is like my parents would always say, money doesn't grow on trees. And I grew up pretty poor,
Mm-hmm.
and they would say that a lot. So what that happens to me in my belief system is that money is hard to come by. If
Right.
money doesn't grow on trees, there's not enough money for me. And what does that set me up to believe throughout my entire life? Is that it's unachievable. Why even bother to strive to gain wealth? Or I have no value. It's just this limiting belief is just keeping me from excelling unknowingly a lot of times. You hear people say life is hard. If you keep thinking life is hard and you're saying life is hard, guess what's going to happen?
Your life's gonna be hard.
Your life's going to be hard. So being able to change your perspective and that's what we essentially had to do in order to get through this reckoning is changing that mindset Changing from life is hard to maybe life is going to present challenges. It's true. Changing it in a way that is more positive and more helpful for you to overcome the hurdles. Give yourself grace, give yourself permission to make these changes to your belief systems that may be limiting you.
It's
Ha-
really hard to identify those, isn't it? Because they're so ingrained into
Um,
how you see the world. I think they
yeah,
call that what the default mode network, which is like all the conditioning that you have in your life that determines how you react to things basically on a unconscious or subconscious level.
sure.
And that I know in my life I've spent so much time just reacting emotionally to things and not like taking that moment to pause, to recognize my limiting beliefs, to see things from a much more balanced perspective.
Hmm.
It's pretty hard, but all these things they're great. We talk about giving ourselves permission to reach beyond limiting beliefs, but when you're in the middle of the reckoning, half the stuff that I hear or heard just felt like cliches, and it just nothing would resonate because
Yeah.
I was going through this, and I know you're doing the same. It's by yourself. You're alone. There's nobody out there that's truly going to understand the pain and the loss that you might be feeling at that moment of reckoning.
Right. And it goes really deep into our brains, right? It's that amygdala part of your brain, which is that
Mm-hmm.
ancient reptilian brain.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you mention like reacting,
Yeah.
that's what's being triggered because we're programmed to kind of live in the negative and live in the fear,
To
right?
stay
It's an
alive, it's
to
like a
stay alive
survival
for
instinct.
survival. Yeah, exactly. It's that somatic
Mm.
experiencing that we want to be able to run away from a tiger that's chasing us, right? You don't want to just sit there and be like, huh, is this a dangerous situation to be in, right? So that's where that reaction comes from.
Mm-hmm.
It's for survival. When you're in the deep, dark depths of loneliness, the last thing you want to hear is, don't worry, it's gonna get better.
Yeah.
Like, no, it's not because I'm living in the moment right now. That's like when we're in fear, we're in the moment.
Yeah.
We're never more in the moment than when we're in fear. Allowing that and feeling that is so important because that's real. That's what reality is.
Once you think you've found resolution, all it takes is just a small stimulus to make you go back to maybe some of the pain that you were experiencing before.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a good support network, this could go on for a long period of time. Or if you don't have the drive to take the time to try to shift your perspective, then that concept of your
Mm,
suffering after that moment of reckoning will just keep repeating itself and repeating itself. One of the things that I found recently in trying to navigate some of this with my support system is if I would tell the story about what I'm going through one more time to somebody else. Every time I told that story, I would slightly shift it
mm,
to reinforce some aspect of it that I felt was like what I was truly feeling or experiencing. It happens when we recall events in our lives. We recall them under the frame of all our previous conditioning, which makes us
right.
then see things differently. And that conditioning can really get us into a lot of trouble. The other process of this is the process of sharing what you're going through. And every time you share it, it's like you re-experience that pain once again, right? So
Right.
there's this great story about this guy gets shot with an arrow and it hits him right in the chest, and he's like, "Oh my god, I got shot with an arrow!" And he pulls out the arrow and he goes to his buddy and he says, "Look, I got shot with this arrow," and he drives it back into his own chest again. And he goes to his next person, "Look, I got shot with an arrow. Feel sorry for me," and he drives the arrow back into his chest again. It's self-inflicted pain. That actually the moment of pain that you first experience usually is not even remotely as painful as the amount of pain that you inflict after that moment. So we have this moment of reckoning. We know we can no longer be with the person we want to be, or we can no longer play our instrument, or whatever. We no longer have a foot. Whatever you're going through, that pain is incredibly, incredibly real. Sharing it is incredibly important, but part of that sharing is what I call wallowing. It's like I need
Mm,
somebody to feel what I'm feeling, so it maybe goes away or take this away. but nobody's going to feel it the way you're going to feel it, right?
Right.
So I struggled with that part a lot because I
Hmm.
needed support, but it wasn't coming from anywhere. And the only
Right.
place I could find it was inside my own head to try to quiet all the noise, just the constant noise, the replaying of what might be, the loss of income, loss of connections with all the people I used to work with, all the gigs I would have had. All I could focus on was loss, 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 loss.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so for me, I started finding ways to get out into nature and start to gain more perspective about what really is important. And it's incredibly hard to do. The emotional healing that comes after a reckoning is not just, this is not linear. It's something that we're gonna have to kind of keep re-experiencing as we recall these moments in our lives. But at the same time, if we do the right kind of work, I think in relation to mindfulness and finding balance, every time these events present themselves or you recall them, I think they lessen in their intensity. Does that happen for you in your experience?
I think so. Yeah. And I like the questioning that you bring up as far as like why I keep telling the same story. It does change every time. We're trying to share something within ourselves to heal ourselves. And there's some healing that comes with that. If you told that story to someone who had just gone through the same exact thing,
Mm-hmm.
that you are connected with someone, I think maybe you may have done that. What was that inside of you when you made that connection? Was that helpful for your healing?
That was a big one. I have a buddy that lives down the road. He's a trombone player, and he blew out his ear playing with this orchestra. Timpani player hit a timpani way too loud, and boom. And so his hearing loss is actually more profound than mine. So when I ran into this, I contacted him right away. And having the opportunity to just hear his story allowed me to realize that I wasn't stuck permanently in this state of pain. That, yeah, he's figured out solutions to work beyond it in his life. And if he can do that, maybe I can do the same.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I'm hoping our conversations recording here will give people like a sense of companionship in their own reckonings, maybe. It'll
Right.
give people, I think, a language that they could use to maybe identify where they're at in a process. Maybe it gives them permission to not feel as lost or stuck or unsure, knowing that other people have gone through it. And then I think hearing stories from other people sometimes allows us to feel like, okay, I'm truly not alone. Other people have gone through this before and survived, because
Right.
when you're in it, it doesn't feel like you're going to survive. I was listening to Noah Rasheta. He has a podcast that's quite good. It's called Secular Buddhism, and he talked about this philosopher, Chinese philosopher from like the 4th century before Christ. He was crazy, and his story was about a farmer who has this horse, and the horse basically runs away, and his neighbors say, "Oh, that's really bad luck. Your horse ran away." And the farmer says, "Not really. No, maybe it's not a bad thing. Maybe, who knows? How do I know?" The next day, a whole pile of horses come back with the original horse. He brings like all these horses back to the farm. And the neighbor says, "Oh, what good luck. You now have more horses." And the farmer says, "I don't know. Maybe so, maybe not." And then the farmer's son hops on the horse and he falls off and he breaks his leg. And the neighbor's like, "Oh, that's really too bad. It's not good." And the farmer says, "Hey, maybe so, maybe not. I don't know." Soon after, all these young men of the village get called up to go to war, but his son can't go because he broke his leg on the horse. Maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing.
Mm.
So that story, when I had heard it, and I had heard it like right around the time that all this was going down for me, I was like, wow, I have a choice about how I can choose to react to all of my
Mm.
situations in life. And I understand that pain is there, but pain doesn't necessarily have to be a good thing or a bad thing. And so it forced me to study about the concept of equanimity and understanding that if you can stay in the middle,
Mhm.
then you're not trying to make things better. You're just trying to understand and be aware that things are what they are. And it allows you to live much more in the present. And I'm hoping that some of those lessons that I've discovered through the farm and the horse in itself could allow myself and maybe others through this podcast to find some form of relief as their life begins to change radically.
I think when if you can live your life with no judgment, you will find much more peace, you
It's
know?
really hard to do.
It's really hard to do because we're always judging. I don't know if like
It
it's part of who we are or part of our culture or if,
goes back to your instincts, like you said, in the reptilian brain. You see somebody and you judge them on their appearance and their looks and their
of
facial
course.
expressions and all this sort of stuff. And we think we know who people are based on their external, persona. And that's so far from the truth,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think what we're talking about here is awareness and having a heightened level of awareness so that we can navigate these challenging times, because I think that's ultimately the key is understanding your brain. And when you understand your brain and why it does what it does, you can navigate those times with such greater ease. So I
S-
hope that the podcast will allow people to kind of navigate things maybe a little differently based on some of the things that we've gone through. How do you envision like the next podcast to evolve?
yeah, I think like taking some of the topics we talked about today and kind of taking a deeper dive into like how do you become more aware or how do you witness yourself reacting and
Hmm.
what is self-reflection and how do you go through situations and how are you more present? One thing I would love to leave today with is
Hmm.
like providing little tips that kind of
Yeah.
got me through situations. And these are things that I've tried
Sure.
to help me get through. And it just ties in with the mindfulness and this book I bought years and years and years ago by Thich Nhat Hanh, who's passed. But his words were about when you're doing something like washing the
Hmm.
dishes, to just be washing the dishes. And the mantra that you create for yourself is, I'm washing the dishes. And taking that moment to be present it's a mind shift. And it feels so good.
Mm.
It feels so good that you want to do it more.
I did something similar to that, and I started to become really aware of every time I would daydream. And when I started to think about a thought and I was becoming conscious of the thought, I would find a way to say, do I want to be thinking about this right now? And if I don't want to be thinking about it, I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to turn it off. It's the same kind of idea
Catching
of
yourself.
being present, isn't it the same? Because I think about every time you hop in the shower, you're taking a shower, your brain just goes on.
Oh, I
You're
come
not
up with
thinking
the
about,
best things. I
you're not,
just go in the shower to think.
yep, I know, it's crazy. But
But
what if you did that consciously? Like, I'm now washing my hair. Okay, I'm going to think about what I have to do next today, but I'm consciously making that decision as opposed to
right.
obsessing and having obsessive thoughts. It's trying to break those patterns
Yeah,
of this automatic pilot that's inside our head.
exactly.
And I
I
think,
love that. Yeah.
yeah, the automatic pilot is probably, we need it to survive, but it's also, we give it way too much control.
Taking back the
Taking
control.
back the control
Let's do
at the
it. Let's
edge of
take it back.
reckoning. Nice. Well, this is going to be fun, Sue. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and these people on these
It's so
topics.
helpful. And yeah, I appreciate your time too. And
Come
it's
back
great
for more,
talking to you.
people. I think there's going to be some good, juicy stuff. Hang in there.